Now then, we've got a whole lesson dedicated to RAID, where we discuss the different RAID levels in detail as well as performance related characteristics. So we won't deliver a full RAID sermon here, but we'll cover some important points. Let's start with RAID 1. RAID 1 is mirroring, not parity. This means that it doesn't suffer from the small block write penalty that parity-based RAID schemes suffer from. This means that RAID 1 and RAID 10 technologies are usually a good choice for high write performance, especially small block random write performance. However, many RAID 1 and RAID 10 implementations suffer a little bit on the read front, as often only half of the drives are used for read operations. And between RAID 1 and RAID 10, RAID 10 is the better choice as it gives all of the benefits of mirroring plus striping. Then there's parity-based RAID, including RAID 5 and RAID 6. As both of these RAID levels are based on parity, they suffer from something we call the write penalty. Basically, parity-based RAID systems struggle at performing small block writes, as they have to perform update and place operations, which are slow to perform. Think of it as being a little bit like this. In an email or a Word document, it's easy to delete an entire sentence and write a new one in its place. You just highlight the old sentence and type a new one over the top of it. Simple as that. But it's much harder or much more complicated to do a lot of minor changes within an existing sentence. Maybe swapping a couple of words around, adding and removing some punctuation, changing a word for maybe a more appropriate word. You might actually be changing less than replacing the entire sentence, but because you're modifying an existing sentence that's in place, it's hard work and it's more time consuming. Well, the same goes for making small updates to RAID 5 and RAID 6 volumes. They're fine with large writes where they overwrite an entire RAID stripe, but as soon as you start making in-place updates to existing RAID stripes, performance comes crashing down. On the positive side though, RAID 5 and RAID 6 can be excellent at read workloads. This is because they bring multiple drives into play when performing the read, effectively parallelizing or striping the workload over multiple drives. They also perform well at sequential workloads, read or write, again thanks to parallelizing these operations over multiple drives. And while on the topic of RAID, let's mention rebuilds. When a drive in a system fails, RAID saves your life and saves your job by making sure that you don't lose data. Great! But when a drive fails, the RAID subsystem ends up with a lot of work on its hands in order to rebuild and restore redundancy to that RAID set. And this can sometimes impact the overall performance of the system. So with this in mind, you need to make sure that you prioritize your RAID rebuild jobs appropriately. As an example, although a high-speed rebuild operation will reprotect your RAID set the fastest, it may impact performance while it runs. And there are two major types of RAID rebuilds: drive copies and drive rebuilds. Which of the two occurs depends on the failure mode of the drive. If a drive is merely predicted as failing, that is, your RAID controller thinks the drive is about to fail, then it'll preempt the failure and copy the contents of the drive to a spare drive. And as this is a copy operation, it's a quick and computationally simple operation, so low CPU overhead. However, if the drive has actually failed, bang, gone up in a cloud of smoke, there's obviously no option to copy its contents to a spare drive. This time you need to rebuild its contents, either from a mirror copy or from parity. Now, if it happens that it needs to be rebuilt from parity, then this is a longer and a more computationally intensive task, so higher CPU overhead. Oh, and worth noting, as sure as you're listening to my voice right now, DBAs, database administrators, will always want RAID 1 or RAID 10. Seriously, they think that RAID 5 and RAID 6 technology is stuck in the dark ages and hasn't moved on over the years. So be prepared to talk to your DBAs about performance when it comes to RAID.